I'm a big old idiot. All right, cool. Hello. Oh, now you can hear me double. All right, let's turn that down. Just when I think I'm prepared, I'm super duper not. Let's go over to faded in. Da, da, da. Good evening, everyone. Haha, and welcome to Smokescreen, a GM's guide to tricking your players into thinking that you know what you're doing. I am your host, SirJanks. You may know me. I am a dungeon master here on Carpe DM. I run the Saturday games, which is mostly Road to Elturel. Lately, there have also been several one-shots. And we have a really good time. And on Thursdays, I hop on the channel and I do a little hour-and-a-half stream where I just talk about dungeon mastering and my takes on it, my takes on the DMG, things that I sometimes do behind the screen and I've heard other people do that are really useful and I think are good to spread around. And I answer all of you lovelies' questions about TTRPGs and dungeon mastering and all those other things. I always start late because I have to go and get my tea because I never make it ahead of time because I'm crazy. And tonight I am particularly late because I was trying to be good at Twitch. And I tweeted out the stream on Twitter. And then I was trying to figure out how to add it to my Instagram story. And so while I was brewing tea, I was trying to figure out Instagram. And I'm really bad at it. I've almost never used the story function for any reason, which is weird because I love telling stories, but I don't use that function. And I couldn't figure it out for the life of me. But I do think that I posted something. I'm not sure. And then I realize now that I've completely forgotten to say something in Discord about the stream starting. So if any of my friends are in the audience right now listening, feel free to hop on to the Carpe DM Discord and tweet about the stream. I would appreciate that. Also, if you are not a part of the Discord, you can hop in there and go to the questions for the team text channel to write in questions that I will answer in the last half an hour of the stream. Or you can drop them in the Twitch chat, and I will also see them there. So, tonight on the agenda, we are going to talk about some random things, tips that I have. I have here at the top of my notes 10 tips for GMs. That is untrue because I could not actually think of 10 that could be made short and snappy. So instead, it's going to be 7 things that are useful to GMs behind the Dungeon Master screen. I'm doing it this way because what we've been doing is going through the Dungeon Master's Guide, sort of section by section. We're about to move on to Chapter 2, but I realized that Chapter 2 is all about how to build a multiverse and all the different planes of existence. And there is it's sort of a barren desert as far as as far as actually being able to proffer some interesting mechanical tips on how to run the game. A lot of great story stuff, but we've been doing a lot of great story stuff up to this point, so I want to give you guys a chance to do something mechanical. Hey, it's Emmy. What up, Emmy? Welcome to the stream. Well, good. I'm glad that perhaps some of my advice can be of assistance to you tonight. So, without further ado, we're going to stay on this screen tonight. Except for one or two things, I'm going to switch over to the screen that lets us look at the DMG. But for the most part, we're just going to stay here. And I'm going to type my little notes down here in the bottom where I usually put questions from you guys. And then I'll go over my notes And then in the last half an hour, I'll be answering any questions you have. So put those questions in the chat or in the Discord for me, and I will answer them as may be. But first, let's get into it. So, thing number 1 on my list of 7 things that are useful as a dungeon master. So some of these, I'm going to admit, are going to be more like self-critiques, but also useful for everyone. And I find that this is something that it came to me because I was rewatching the last Road to Elturel game, and I realized that probably about like 50% of things that I was responding to in that game were things that were not actually directed at me. And I didn't realize it until I was listening back to it. And I realized that other conversations were happening, and I was just so focused on what was going on in the game that I thought that there were things directed at me, and they weren't, which makes me feel very silly in retrospect. So my first tip for any aspiring DMs or GMs or old school is to take a breath and take time to listen to what your players have to say. It is something that I always try to do in Road to Elturel, and anytime I'm running D&D. It's a story that's told together with other people. That's something that I reiterate a lot on these streams, and I believe it to be true. So sometimes as the dungeon master, there's so many things going on in your head. You're trying to think about like monster stat blocks. You're trying to think of the story paths that you have laid out, the locations, the NPCs, and what's going on with each individual character, and it can all get very muddled, and it can be very easy to sort of lose your footing in your brain. It happens to me all the time. It happens to me while I'm doing this stream. I'm talking and I'm trying to think of things to say, and then like my brain goes in 50 different directions. It helps that I have a lovely set of notes over here. I have notes for this stream, and then I also have notes for Road to Elturel, which I reflect on and look through, and it helps me keep track of everything going on with those characters in that game. But sometimes when we're in the middle of it, I can kind of get lost in the sauce over here with my book of things, and I don't always listen to what's going on with the players. I get to be really lucky because I can go back and watch my Dungeons and Dragons sessions. I do know some people who record their sessions of Dungeons and Dragons and go back and listen or watch them after the fact. I think that that's really cool. It's certainly helped me. And it also helps that my lovely players and other people here on the Carpe Diem channel have a podcast every Wednesday, the night before this, where they talk about everything that's going on in the games and like what's been interesting for them and where they think their characters will go. And so I get the benefit of having a lot of insight into what the players are thinking about their characters and sort of where to take them. But even in the moment, it can be really key to just sort of take a minute to breathe, especially when like there's a lot of RP going on between the characters. Sometimes it's okay to just like sit back and just sort of listen and see what everyone's doing, see what everyone's thinking. A lot of Dungeons and Dragons is improvisation in the moment. You sort of have a structure laid out as the DM, but you never know exactly where your players are going to go. And so to have those structures laid down, and then to be able to listen to the players and to sort of react to what their characters are doing within that structure, it can make the story feel very alive for both you and the players. And honestly, I would be lying to say that I didn't get a lot of story ideas from just listening to the players. They have ideas that weren't necessarily what I was going to go with at first, but I really enjoyed the way that they took them, and so I ended up just sort of rolling with what they were saying. I remember one time in a game, to use an example, the players had encountered this giant chasm, and I didn't really have a way for them to cross it. I just know that it somehow involved a griffin. And so one of the players suggested that maybe the way across the chasm was like an invisible Indiana Jones style bridge. And I thought that was really fun. So I kind of took that and I thought, what if instead of a bridge, it was a giant stone griffin that was asleep, spanning the chasm? And they had to cross over the stone griffin, and it sort of woke up in the middle of it, and then it turned into this like Shadow of the Colossus moment where they were flying around, all attached at the waist by rope, clinging to the tail of this giant stone griffin. It was flying through mountains. It was very entertaining, and it was absolutely inspired by what those characters were doing in the moment. So, listening to the players, taking a minute to sort of breathe and collect your thoughts, that is absolutely something that is incredibly useful to you as a DM. And I hope that you guys can take that and sort of apply it whenever you try DMing, which I hope that you do. Um, oh, yeah, I do have one other note here that I'll just throw out there, which is a lot of people are super uncomfortable with just like chilling in silence. I get it. This is also me. I tend to find, especially watching back, that I jump on a lot of silences. I'm just like, now's my time to talk. Um, but sometimes, you just let the silence sit and you just sort of let everything percolate. I'm a person who takes a lot of time to think before I speak. And so I tend to be silent for long stretches of time. Friends can attest to this. Anyone who's talked to me before can attest to this. I will say something, and then I'll just like sit there and ruminate on all the words that are being said after me for a while. And then I'll say something else. And it could be like 10 minutes before I speak again on something that like the conversation has already blown past because I finally had a cohesive thought on it. Um, Sometimes silence is okay to just like sit and chill and let everything permeate, you know? That's perfectly acceptable. All right, so that is my first tip for you guys. Oh, thank you, Whiskey. I appreciate that. See, Emmy knows. Emmy's talked to me before. But yeah, it's true. Silence is one of those things where it's really hard to like sit with it. But once you get used to sitting with it, it's actually really chill and relaxing to just sort of like let it all sink in and then just like move forward. Um, First tip. Second tip. This one is one of those helpful mechanical things that I hope that you all enjoy and use yourselves. This is something that I really enjoy using. This was something that was inspired by a different RPG altogether. So I have a superhero RPG in my possession, a lovely TTRPG called The Spectaculars. And if can I type and talk at the same time? We'll see. Using what? Whoop! I can't type all that in. All right, let's see. You're not using a. Sorry, I can't type and talk at the same time. I have to type this in and then speak, because I am incapable of multitasking as a person. Uh, and whenever you're producing your own, it's whatever. Um, I promise I'll bequeath my story on you all as soon as I get this set into a size that will fit in the box. What? All right, there we go. Yeah, if you're not using a map, everything is striking distance. So, what I was saying at the beginning, what my story was here. So, I have a TTRPG called The Spectaculars, and it's a superhero RPG. It's super cool, it's super fun. Superhero RPGs are really hard, though, because everybody has superpowers. And superpowers can be very tricksy and unwieldy things when it comes to TTRPGs. I played a couple superhero ones. Another one I played is Masks Generations, which is powered by the Apocalypse system, which I don't want to get too deeply into here, but I think that the Spectaculars does a really good job of sort of, having there be like some limitations whenever it comes to how to use superpowers. But one of the things that I think it does incredibly well, that I love, is that when it comes to distances, there are no measurable distances in that game. You are either out of range, you are within range, you can move into striking distance, or you can be in striking distance. So you can be close, in range, or out of range, or very far out of range. And whenever I play Dungeons and Dragons, I almost exclusively play Dungeons and Dragons without battle maps. I have a couple of friends that we play like on Roll20, where we actually have battle maps and we can measure distances and things. Occasionally, I will use maps as like visual references. There is a thing coming up in Road to El Terrell, I think pretty soon, that's going to require the use of a battle map of sorts. Perhaps not the typical D&D battle map. Maybe we'll sort of have a breakdown of that after we use it in the game here on Smokescreen. But as far as like imagine distances goes, if you're the DM and you're just like imagining distances, guess what? Your players don't really have to ask you if a monster is within range of their spells. It just can be within range of their spells. It's so much easier. Why have a monster that's 200 feet away and moving at a pace of, say, 40 feet per turn that you have to keep track of in your head, without any kind of visual reference whatsoever, when you could just be like, nah, you know what? The monster's 30 feet away from you. On its turn, it's going to move into striking range of you. You're already within striking range of it. Do as you please. This is something that was solidified for me very early on in Road to El Terrell. If any of you watched some of the very early sessions, there was a lovely game where there was a situation going on. The players were perhaps a little less confident in their characters, or they wanted to really try to sort of strategize with what was going on. And they had opted in a very strange and wonderful way to move forward as a group from different sides, 5 feet at a time. And they asked me every single time they moved how close they were now. And I think at that time I was actually keeping track of distances, because there's actually a thing on the Dungeon Master's screen that has encounter distances on it, like when to start an encounter, right? It's this little table right here, and I'd actually rolled on it, and I think I got 300 feet as the encounter distance for this thing. So they started at 300 feet, and it probably took us 15 solid minutes for them to actually get within like true encounter range with what was going on. Like to actually be close enough to engage with the fight that was happening and to actually do something about it. It took them maybe 15 minutes. And after that, I was just like, there has to be a better way. And so when I found the Spectaculars and I played that, I was like, you know what? This is a much better way. Just use approximate distances and it will save you so much trouble if you're the kind of like imaginative visual thinker. Now, if you're using like actual tabletop pieces, if you're like using miniatures and like sets and dressings and stuff, or if you actually have battle maps, absolutely go by the distances that are written in the book. And if there is a particular reason why you want a monster to sort of be out of range at the beginning of a fight or at some point during a fight, maybe it's retreating, that's also very easy to figure out too. Just imagine it like if a monster is within striking range, it can use its movement to move into like ranged attack range, and then it can use its action to dash, and then that gets it out of range completely. Like, it's very easy to just like translate all of that into Dungeons and Dragons, and it is like baby shampoo. It's so no tears, and I love it. It's my favorite way of doing distances in D&D. So if you are the kind of person to try playing D&D online without Roll20 or some sort of battle map system that you can all share, absolutely using like Using just like vague approximate distances, it will save you so much headache and heartbreak. Um, Especially because like if you just want your players to have fun and they're like ready to do some damage, just have the monsters within range to do damage, you know? If you want your monsters to escape for story reasons, the monsters can escape so easy. It's so easy. It's so great. I love it. Anyway, yeah, so hopefully that's of use to you. That is tip number 2. Yes. Speaking of letting monsters escape for story reasons. Um, so obviously if you do that, make it so it's not really obvious. It's like, oh, there's story going on here and I don't want you to kill this person yet. So they're going to run away and they're going to get far, far away from you, way faster than you would expect them to, because I don't want you to kill them yet. Sometimes like when it comes to important story details, you just gotta like account for what that monster would do. Monsters are smart. I will say that even though I use approximate distances, I've pulled this book out before. I'll pull it out again. I have this lovely book called The Monsters Know What They're Doing, Dungeon Master's Tactics for Monsters. And I absolutely use it. My monsters generally aren't stupid. They have intelligence modifiers and they use them. Or they have wisdom modifiers and instincts and they use those too. They're not going to just like attack until I die. No, that's not how most monsters work. And while I'm changing this, one other thing that I want to throw out there, if you are battling on a specific terrain, I would suggest using some sort of battle map. But if you don't, just kind of be aware of like what the general dangers are and what might set them off. And I'll talk about that more here in a second, because there's another tip that I have that's perhaps a bit more useful for that. But tip number 3, important story details. If I can spell story details. I hit the caps. What have I done? Details can be left to proficiencies. Yes. So, time and time again, it's the classic Dungeon Master story, right? You have a really cool idea. You have this really cool scene set up. All it takes is for the barbarian to make a perception roll, and then they see the hidden passage, and then it leads them down into the hidden temple under the sewers, and then you have an entire dungeon planned out. Except that barbarian rolls and that barbarian rolls a 2, and there's just no way for you to save that. And the party is all like, should we also roll perception checks? Because there's clearly something here that you want us to find. And you're like, I don't know. The moment feels ruined now. I've told you to look for a thing and now you know it's there. So now you all want to do perception checks. And it's all blah, blah, blah. There's a very easy solution for this, as it turns out. And it's something that I've used in part before. I've shared a version of this in an earlier smokescreen stream, where I have said before that sometimes whenever I just need to take a moment to sort of work out what's going to happen next, I will make a character roll something that I know that they're amazing at, because I know that they'll succeed because they have, say, like a plus 14 or a plus 10 or even a plus 8. I'm like, that person will probably succeed. So I'm going to have them roll, and while they're rolling, I'm going to take a mental break to try to figure out what it is they're going to find whenever they roll. And just sort of like take a story moment for myself. But if you already have a story moment in mind, and you just kind of like want it to happen, and you kind of want to work it into the story, but you also don't want to just like hand it over. Proficiencies are a really great way to like prevent random dice rolls from just wrecking your story. This is something that came to my attention with Tasha's Cauldron for Everything. So Tasha's Cauldron, which is a lovely book that I find a lot of very useful things in, and I also just really enjoy Tasha as a character. She's very fun. One of the really cool things in this book is it has a bunch of puzzles in the back that are sort of drag and drop puzzles to put into a Dungeon and Dragons game, right? And so puzzles are one of those things that if you put them in a game, it's a test of the players more than it's a test of the characters. Puzzles aren't necessarily like traps that you can, you could just find it and then it's like, oh, well, it's just a simple sleight of hand check to disarm it. And it's not like an RP encounter where you're sort of acting in character and just having a conversation. And it's not a battle encounter where you're using your skills of your class. It is, I am laying out this thing. It is going to hurt your brain, and you're going to have to solve it to progress. And so one of the things that they talk about in Tasha's is the fact that even though the players are the ones being challenged by the puzzle, the characters are the ones solving it. And so what is the mechanical way to allow players to benefit from their character skills? And so they actually have a clue system that they introduce with Tasha's, and it's very straightforward. Basically, you come up with clues that are linked to certain skills. And if a character has proficiency with that skill, then they can uncover the clue. If the players need a little help solving the puzzle, one of the characters can uncover this clue because they're proficient in the thing that the clue would clue them into. If none of the characters are proficient in the thing that you made a clue for, then you just have them roll a DC 10 check. And if they pass that check, then they can get the clue. So recently, the Road to El Terrell folks were in the Lonely Tower, which was basically a giant puzzle. It was 3 puzzles stacked on top of each other, more or less. And I kind of figured that the puzzle on the bottom would be the hardest one. So it was a staircase that was trapped, which led up to a trapdoor that was fake. And the real puzzle was a plaque outside the main door, which said, "Rest wary venture and climb not further." And the solution to the puzzle was that you had to take a rest in the cottage attached to the tower. And presumably, whenever you took this rest, you would sleep, but you would also eat. And there was a fire, a hearth, and a cook pot in the cottage. And so whenever you lit the fire, it would reveal elven letters on the wall. And whenever it revealed these elven letters on the wall, you can find the word not in elven, and you would be able to climb the word not to get up to the second floor of the tower. Climb not further. Now, basically, the way that I laid out the clues for this, because I came up with clues for it, one of them was a clue about investigation. And one of them was a clue into insight. So the investigation clue had to do with the plaque outside. And it had to do with the word choice that the person who made the plaque used, which is rest and climb not further. And so Reyna, one of the characters, an elven cleric, she is proficient with investigation. So she actually went out to examine the plaque, and because she was proficient in investigation, I gave her character, while she was examining the plaque, the clue of the word choice is weird. You should pay attention to what they're actually saying on the plaque, right? Now the other clue is that there are bowls and silverware and plates in the cottage. And that doesn't make sense if this is a place for people to rest, why they don't take that stuff with them, because it's nice. And if they do take it with them, why is that stuff restocked when clearly no one actually lives in this cottage full time? And that's supposed to be the clue that, you have to eat something. And Hattie, another one of our characters, she went to chase after her beetle into the cottage, into the kitchen of the cottage, and she is proficient with insight. And so I gave her that clue in the form of her beetle crawling into one of the drawers. And because she's proficient with insight, I say, Hattie finds this weird. And it sort of gives the players a little bit more of a clue. Hello, AJ. Welcome to the stream. Good to have you. We're talking DM advice today. So hopefully you will also enjoy what I have to say. But right now, what we're talking about is the idea that whenever you have an important story moment and you're afraid that if you just have the players roll for it, it could go in a completely lopsided direction that's going to throw off everything you have going on. Sometimes if the characters are just proficient in the thing that you want them to roll, just roll with the proficiency, you know? There's actually an optional rule in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and I don't have it pulled up, so I don't want to go over there and try to find it, because I don't know what page it's on. But there is an optional rule where you can have basically like a floor for characters to roll. And this is sort of like in place of just saying, oh, you're proficient in it, so we'll go with that. But there's an optional rule where basically every character has a set of passive scores. So passive perception is already on most character sheets. It's 10 plus whatever your perception is. So if, say, you have a fighter and the fighter wants to kick down the door, and whenever they roll a 2, even though their strength is, +4, and they're proficient in it, so they get a, let's say, +7, they still only end up with a 9, and they fail miserably at kicking in a door. Well, they're big and tough and brawny. How hard can the door possibly be? So what you can do is say, well, you're proficient in athletics. You have this high strength score. So all you have to do is add 10 plus your athletics, and you get a floor of 17. You have a passive athletics of 17. And so, of course, you can kick in the door. Why wouldn't you be able to kick in the door? It's so easy for you. And so that's another way you can kind of work around it. Obviously, it's always more fun to sort of roll whenever you get the chance to roll. It can also lead to a lot of really unexpected and fun results that can take the story in a lot of different directions, a lot of really fun directions. But whenever you have moments where you really want it to go a certain way, and you kind of want to steer the characters in a certain way, not that you should always do it, but if you have like a couple key moments that you're like, ooh, it'd be really good though, and I think that these guys would really like it, you can always use those passive scores or proficiencies to sort of steer them in the direction you want them to go. Hello, look at all the people who are here. Hello, Zavils, welcome. Of course, AJ, I already said welcome. And yes, passive perception, passive insight, and passive investigation are the ones that are already on, if you use D&D Beyond character sheets, those are already there. But you can calculate a passive score for anything. This is also something that I use whenever people want to, say, sneak. I tend to have one person actively sneaking, and then the floor is the passive perception of the people that they're trying to sneak past. So, for example, you can't really sneak past Reyna because her passive perception is like 25 or something ridiculous. And so it's very hard to sneak past her because her passive perception, she's just very perceptive naturally. That doesn't mean that I won't have Reyna occasionally roll for perception checks whenever she's trying to actively perceive things. But her passive perception is very high. So that is tip number 3 that I have, and it is 6:43. Oh my god, time flies. All right. So, the next thing that I want to share with you guys is such a life changer. It is perhaps one of the greatest things that I have ever heard of. And it's freely available. It's in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and I'll show it to you guys because it's so easy to find when you know where to look. And I didn't know this thing existed until there's a YouTuber, Z Bashu. He does a series called The Animated Spellbook, but he makes a lot of different D&D videos about like DM tips and stuff. like this, but he does a much better job at it and much more concise and shorter. Um, but recently he put out a video where he talks about this thing called the charisma check table, um, which is just like it's so crazy that this thing exists. It's in the Dungeon Master's Guide. It is the most useful thing. So, set up for this. Everyone has heard the story in Dungeons and Dragons where you have like a bard and they're fighting a giant ancient red dragon, and then the bard is like, "I want to seduce the dragon." And then they roll, and then they roll a nat 20, and everyone's like, "Oh," and the DM's like, "Oh," and then the dragon's like, "Hello." And the whole thing just seems very silly and goofy and whatever. And if you're just playing like to be silly and goofy and just like, whatever, just laissez-faire, you're just trying to have a good time with your friends, you can absolutely still play it that way. But if you're going for something a little more based in story and that feels like a really weird choice to you, guess what? Wizards of the Coast thought of that and they made a table for it. And oh god, this is a thing of me. I didn't realize I still had that on. Let me zoom over here. So, this is a little something called the Charisma Check Table, the Conversation Reaction Table. And it is literally a guide to how a creature would react based on how they feel about the party. And this is something I have actually used in games, and it has led to incredible RPing. So, let me go over it first, and then I'll tell you this really cool story that has to do with this table. But basically, the way that this is broken down is every social interaction in Dungeons and Dragons can basically be divided into two parts, right? You have I just realized I spelled cataclysm wrong. Hold on. I'm sorry. That's going to super duper bug me if I just leave that like that. I really got to fix that. Where is the text? Where is the text? There it is. Cataclysm. Not cataclysm. All right. That's cows. Whenever you have a stampede of cows that raises a town to the ground, that's a cataclysm. That's a entirely different thing from just a good old catechism. Anyway, so the way that this table works is every social interaction can basically be broken down into two halves. You have the half where the character is trying to convince the NPC of a thing, and then you have the half where the person actually makes a check, whether it be intimidation, persuasion, or deception, right? To sort of convince this NPC to go along with whatever it is they're doing. So the conversational part of that RP is how you determine how a creature feels about your party. And typically, this is going to only move one category per conversation. So you're never going to jump a creature from, let's say, a hostile ancient red dragon to a friendly ancient red dragon. That's probably never going to happen in a single interaction. What you can do is maybe bump that ancient red dragon to an indifferent red dragon. Maybe you can convince it to be indifferent about you. Or you could turn something indifferent into a friendly. Or you can slight a person and turn them from friendly to indifferent, or from indifferent to hostile. But basically, it's kind of like per interaction with this person, per conversation where you're trying to get them to do a thing for you, you can kind of move that bar up and down by one. So that's kind of how you decide where you land on the table. And then you have the player make the roll. And so based on what their feelings about the party are, you can determine what sort of things this creature is willing to do. So a friendly creature, for example, if the person trying to persuade the creature gets anywhere between a 0 and a 9, then the creature does what's asked, but they won't take any risks or make any sacrifices to do the thing that they're asked to do. So as soon as they come across a situation where it's going to be a risk or it's going to be a sacrifice for them, they stop doing it and they stop helping you with it. If you get a 10 to a 19, then that creature can accept a minor risk or a sacrifice to do as you asked. So they'll like take a little risk, maybe they'll break a rule, or maybe they'll like, they're willing to like give up a cart to help you out or something like that, but they won't take a major risk. But if you get a nat 20 or a 20 or above with a friendly creature, then they'll accept a significant risk or sacrifice to help you out. So the story that I want to tell with this is I had a party, and they are currently in the Beastlands, and they were after a magical flower that could create a healing salve that one of the party members is trying to obtain to help her daughter and her farm. Because her farm is currently suffering from something called the briar rot, which has moved from plants into people. And so she is trying to get this magical cure-all, or at least what she has heard is a magical cure-all, and take it back to her farm to sort of help out the farm and make sure that her daughter is okay. So the last challenge that the party had to face on the way there was a dragon made entirely of ice, whose only job was to guard these magic flowers. So when the party got there, the paladin of the party, who is an Oath of Redemption paladin, who had a terrible childhood, but is really trying to turn her life around, she decided that she was going to walk out across the frozen lake to the waterfall where these flowers were growing, and she was going to do it by herself. She asked everyone else to wait behind her, right? So she walks out, and about halfway to the waterfall, this ice dragon emerges from the snow and tries to bite her. So, purely by luck and chance, the attack missed, and so her paladin managed to roll out of the way. And then she immediately turned around, and she threw up her hands, and she just said, "We don't want to fight you. We are here for the flowers. We need them to help somebody, but we mean you no harm." And she didn't draw. She has this huge ass greatsword, but she like didn't draw it. She kept her hands up, and she was just like, she was very, she was very open to this ice dragon. And so I had her roll a persuasion check. So this ice dragon was obviously hostile, but she managed to get higher than a 10. And so on the hostile chart, it says that if you get higher than a 10, the creature offers no help, but does no harm. So, because she rolled well, and because she didn't actually just like straight up attack the dragon sort of just moved itself to stand between her, the party, and this waterfall where the magical flowers were growing. And so, after they saw that the dragon didn't go for a second attack on their friend, the rest of the party kind of stepped forward. And they tried to figure out how to get this dragon to let them have some of these flowers. So the bard of the party, she has a flower crown, and it's like, this is one of her defining character features. It's this flower crown that she wears. And so she proposed to the dragon a trade. And so she took off her flower crown and she offered it to the dragon in exchange for some of the flowers growing on the waterfall. So the dragon sniffed the flower crown, and I had her roll a persuasion check to see how the dragon thought about it. So basically the dragon became indifferent to them because they made it an offering. And so it kind of took these flowers and it sort of put them in a place of importance up against the waterfall. And then the nature cleric, the one who's trying to get these flowers to save her farm and her daughter, she uses plant growth to make this flower wreath grow. And as she makes it grow, the dragon like breathes ice breath on it, and it creates this new sort of frozen rose that grows out along the base of the waterfall. And the dragon was sort of delighted by this, and because it was now indifferent to them, I had her roll a persuasion check with help from the bard, and she actually got a nat 20 on her check. And because the dragon was indifferent, the creature will accept a minor risk or sacrifice to do as asked. And so the dragon actually climbed up the waterfall for the party and fetched 5 of the magic healing flowers, and also 5 of these new magic rose flowers that are growing there, and offered them to the party sort of as an exchange. And so, like, they basically, the point of this story is that they had this amazing, like, RP moment where they could have just, like, fought this ice dragon and had a crazy battle with it. But instead, they took this other approach to it. And because I was using this table to sort of gauge what the dragon's reactions were going to be, it created, like, this beautiful roleplay moment where they created a new kind of magic flower, which actually does something mechanically in the game. And it was just really cool. So this table is amazing, and I love it, and it's on page 245 of the Dungeon Master's Guide, and I love it dearly, and I suggest that you all check it out. So, end of rant. But if you're ever wondering, like, how do I run these like social interaction checks whenever the players are talking with NPCs, if you want a guide, if it's like a really key story moment, or you just want like a general guideline to go off of, that table is so good, and I totally recommend that you check it out because it's amazing. Yes, thank you all, by the way, for the chat and that entire time laughing at cataclysm. Yes. I'm going to use that in a game now just for fun. A giant stampede of cows. A cataclysm. All right, so let us move swiftly along as time draws short to what the next piece of advice is. So this is piece of advice number 5. This was something that I actually learned while watching a stream of a bunch of Wizards of the Coast people. I learned that all monster encounters are balanced to last 3 rounds. So, like, the suggested, like, encounter sizes and all that you find in Xanathars, all of that is balanced to last for 3 rounds of combat. This is amazing and wonderful, and has been an incredible boon to me whenever running monster encounters, because I have all sorts of troubles running monster encounters, mostly because I always feel like, in the context of the system, in the context of the story, they feel like they should be really cool and epic and all these other things, but in the context of actually running them with the rules of the system, sometimes they can feel very flat as people sort of decide what they want to do with their turn and what actions they're going to take. And so, there's not always that flow of action movie fantasy battle that you kind of hope that there is. But one of the things that really helps with that is knowing that all combat is supposed to last about 3 rounds. So let's say you're going into round 3, and the monster that they're fighting is, down but not dead yet. Consider this. Consider just letting that monster die in a spectacular fashion to one of your characters. Because why drag a battle on for 5 rounds when you could get it done in 3? And I find that this is actually something that works incredibly well and really keeps the action of the game moving along. But it still feels really satisfying and fun whenever you're doing combat encounters. And honestly, knowing that encounters last 3 rounds, or if you make it so that encounters last 3 rounds, it kind of lets you like sort of figure out what you want to happen each round. What I mean by that is, one of the things that I always do whenever I'm trying to like build out an encounter to sort of get it to a point where it feels like, you know, narratively interesting, like tension is building. Um, I usually have things happen on uh, initiative count 20. So an example of this is in the troll clause. The party was fighting a group of trolls. So on round one, they were just fighting two trolls that were coming in to troll claw forward where the party was. On round two, a second troll appeared. No, sorry, a third troll appeared on the top of a nearby hill over top of the troll wall. And then on initiative 20 for round three, the other two trolls were dead. And the third troll got its head bitten off by a dire troll, which then climbed up over the troll wall to invade Troll Claw Ford and attack the players. And that was where we ended the session. And so, because I kind of knew that dire troll was lurking in the background, I could build up to that dire troll sort of each round by adding little things that felt like the pressure was building until that big moment of the dire troll reveal. And so whenever I think about combat in 3 rounds, I always sort of think about what could be happening on initiative count 20 each time to sort of build and build and build. Now, I do think that there are opportunities where you can have combat last longer. And this was kind of what I was going to get into earlier and said we would talk about later. Having specialized terrain, other things to worry about in the environment, that can be a way of sort of making extended combat feel dynamic and interesting. If you're battling someone on a crumbling earth moat and part of the ground beneath you is falling away each round, that adds an extra layer of interest and depth to what's going on. And so maybe it lasts longer than 3 rounds, but it's because you're also trying to like maneuver and not fall to your death off of this earth moat. I know that I have an encounter planned with an Oni, which involves a lot of catacombs and hidden places. It involves a lot of stony territory and high ground and low ground, which I think will be very fun to play with. And so having interesting terrain can also be a way to sort of spice up combat encounters. And the only other thing that I would add to this is sort of a catch-all for like some ideas I have about how to run combat encounters and keep them interesting and things, is that if you have NPCs involved in combat encounters, like they're fighting with the party, it's always more fun to let the players kill a thing than for NPCs to kill a thing. So there are a couple times when I've had NPCs fighting alongside the party in Road to Elturel. And honestly, sometimes one of the players in Road to Elturel will make a strike against an enemy, and it will be something that will bring them very close to death, but won't actually kill them. And so whenever that happens, I'm like, okay, so it's the NPC's turn next. So the NPC could be the one to kill this monster, or I can just declare it dead right now, and that player can feel the victory of killing a thing. So that's something else that I do behind the screen, is sometimes monsters have a little bit more health than I pretend that they do. But I think it's more fun for the story and more fun for the players if they actually get the chance to kill the thing itself. So that's kind of my general catch-all of advice for combat. But combat lasting 3 rounds, that is so huge. Even if it's like at the end of 3 rounds, the thing tries to flee, that's totally an option. And that could lead the characters into an even bigger ambush and start combat all over again. But just sort of always kind of trying to keep combat dynamic and fresh is something that I always think a lot about when it comes to Dungeons and Dragons, because it's the one aspect of Dungeons and Dragons that I'm like, oof, this can drag really easily. And so I think about it a lot. Anyway, so I hope that's of use to all of you out there listening. What is thing number 6? Oh, thing number 6 is great. You all are gonna love this. If y'all are still out there listening, basically, all I've been doing up to this point, yes, maybe I think that all of these things are good advice, the first 5 things that I said, but honestly, it was mostly to chase away the Elturel people, just in case they got bored and decided to toddle off, so they won't hear the next thing I say, which is, junk list. What do I mean by this? Let me tell you more. So a junk list is a list of all the junk that the players have collected over the course of a campaign. I have one such list for Road to Elturel. Do you know why I love this list? I love this list because players forget all of the things that they collect, but I don't, because I have a list. I write it all down whenever they collect it, which means that even if it wasn't anything whenever they picked it up, it could be something later. And I love waiting for whenever the players forget that they're holding a thing, for that thing to suddenly become relevant, because that's hilarious and fun for me, and also an incredible twist. And sometimes it's really fun whenever it comes back around. Sometimes it can be really useful. So for example, the party was fighting a gargoyle that had the power to turn things into stone, because it was like an elevated gargoyle basically. And one of the players turned to stone because she failed her constitution checks. It was Kaya, who is our resident bard. And no one in the party and the NPC that was with the group at the time, none of them had the power to undo the curse of petrification. However, a while back, the cleric of the party had collected a crystal tear that she had found in the bottom of a pool, or a basin, I should say, dedicated to the goddess Eldath, the goddess of peace. The crystal tear was full of holy water, blessed by Eldath, and so, whenever she broke the tear over Kaya, guess what? Kaya's fine again. It was an amazing thing that I had always kind of. I have no trouble saying this now because that item is unusable now, because it broke now. But it was something that I always kind of had as a sort of get out of jail free card for the party. It was always meant to be an incredibly powerful healing item if they should need it. And luckily, they kept it, and whenever they did need it, they had it. There are a couple other things that the party has that I'm not going to get into, which are also dangerous things that they're carrying with them. I'm not going to say what they are, because then the party will be like, oh, we should ditch that thing, or oh, what's that about? I'm not going to say what they are, but I'm going to let you all know who are watching this stream right now. The party's carrying some dangerous shit with them, and it's going to come up, and I can't wait for it to come up. I am waiting, I am biding my time for the perfect moment. Why? Because I keep a junk list, and I encourage you to do the same. Junk lists, best lists. And that's what I got to say about that. All right. As fun as that would have been for me to end on, I do have one other thing I want to talk to you guys about before we move into questions. And we are running over our time. So I am going to encourage you all to drop questions either in Discord, in the questions for the team chat, or in the Twitch chat. And after I talk about this, we'll hop over into the Q&A section of the stream, and then we'll wrap things up about 7:30. So, the improv damage table, which is just a great table for all sorts of things. So, you may ask yourself, Janky, DM Janks, as some have been known to call me, when I have crazy traps or random terrain, or a strange monster that I've just made up on the spot that the people that the party is encountering, and I don't know what to do with it. Thank you, Zavils, for dropping the Discord link in there. There are so many random things that can cause damage to players. How am I going to improv all of these things? How am I going to figure out how much damage a hide behind does when I just came up with a hide behind 5 seconds ago? They decided to collapse in a ceiling on themselves. How do I determine damage for that? Well, friends, it's super easy, because on the Dungeon Master's screen, there's a lovely thing that I use all the time. It is called the damage by level and severity table. It is one of my favorite things. First of all, I just love the Dungeon Master screen. There is a surprising amount of useful information on here. I kind of wish that those social interaction checks were on here. They're not, which is unfortunate. Um, but they have like a list of all the skills and abilities that the players have. They have object hit points, object armor classes. They have recommendations for setting DCs, how to track things. They have all the conditions that could possibly be happening. They have the rules for concentration, suffocating, high jump, long jump, all the different actions that you can take in combat that aren't like the special optional actions in the Dungeon Master's Guide. Attack, cast a spell, dash, disengage, dodge, help, hide, ready, search, use a magic item, use an object, use a special ability. So much good stuff. And of course, they have the rules for cover and travel pace, services, and the prices for those services, obscured areas, encounter distances. Cover is something that's actually very fun. Light sources, food, drinking, lodging, all this wonderful stuff, right? But my favorite thing by far will always be the damage by level and severity table. Because, friends, you see that it's broken up by the different groupings of levelings. So we talked about this last week, the different ways that the DMG sort of groups how exactly the party relates to the world based on their level, right? So you have levels 1 through 4, 5 through 10, 11 through 16, 17 through 20. And there are 3 columns. One says setback, one says dangerous, and one says deadly. Did you know that on levels 1 through 4, you can just roll a 1d10 and that could be a setback? Of course, it can also be deadly if you're level 1 and you only have 7 hit points, but hey, whatever. Dangerous is 2d10 and deadly is 4d10. Sometimes it's fun. Whenever the characters get into a ridiculous situation, and let's say they're messing about in a catacombs with a dangerous portal to a demon dimension, and they just need to take damage for some reason, 2d10. That's a great amount of damage for them to take whenever they're suddenly hit by a necrotic beam of demonic energy, and their shadow is being pulled away from them and separated from them, and you just need to be like, how much damage do you take? 2d10. That's a great amount of damage to take. Let's have you take that much damage. Boom. That is perhaps the greatest table in the game. Road to Eltro people will know exactly what I'm talking about whenever I say that. And in case you were wondering how I determined how much damage Snipe took, whenever that happened, that's how. That is exactly how I did it. Yo, Zavils, that is very smart of you to be keeping a junk list for Reyna. That's very, very smart. And I'm glad that you actually did think about the tier. So whenever that moment happened, I'm going to divert back to the tier for a second because the tier is a really cool thing. And also junk lists, still top. I love the improv damage table, but junk lists are top tier. Yeah, the thing about the tier was I do remember that you were looking through your bag, and I don't remember if I had you make a perception check. I suppose it could have just been there in your bag for you to find. But I thought that you might remember it, but also I just wanted to like make sure that you knew that you had an option there to use it to save Gaia, because that's what it was always there for. And I'm so glad that you did choose to use it. And Eldath is very glad that you chose to use it too. You haven't talked to Eldath in a while. I think that you should. Not saying that you should do what I say, but you know, if you ever wanted to talk to Eldath again, I bet that she would be happy about that. But yes, players keeping junk lists, that's very smart. DMs keeping junk lists, god tier. Junk lists forever. All right. So we are going to move into the Q&A section of the thing where I am going to ask questions. And I will answer whatever questions you have. AJ, in answer to an earlier question you have, I will fill you in on the Othral stuff. Do not worry, I will fill you in. Let's see what questions we have. And while I'm navigating to this, I am going to shout out a lot of the wonderful things that we have going on the channel. If you are unaware, there's a lovely stream that happens on Wednesdays called I Roll, Therefore I Am. I listen to it every week, usually Wednesday afternoons. I love listening to that stuff. And it's really cool. All of a bunch of the players get together and sorry, I completely lost my train of thought there for a second. All the players get together and talk about the campaigns that are going on and all the things that they want to talk about and everything going on with their characters and everything that they as players feel about the games that are currently being played. It's a really fun listen, and I really enjoy listening to it. I very rarely hop on because it's usually when I'm at work during the day. But it's a very fun podcast, and I suggest you all check it out. You can also check out Road to El Terrell on Saturdays. That is the game that I DM. It's very fun and very cool, if I do say so myself. I think the players have a lot of good fun. And on Sundays, you can check out Whiskey, that's Dave's campaign, The Crimson Petal. It is super cool. It's super fun. Sometimes he DMs me like ideas that he's having over Discord. Of course, I encourage him to. I'm like, yo, if you ever need a sounding board, hit me up. And he messages me things, and I'm just like, that's great, and I love it. So you should definitely check out his game too. They had their opening session. It was delightful. There was a lot of really cool RP. There were a lot of really cool moments. It was very fun, and you can check out the VOD on Carpe Diem right now. And of course, you can always join me on Thursdays for this. So, let's get to some questions. All right, Emmy, I see that you dropped a question in chat. I will answer yours momentarily. Oh, thank you, Zavils. You also dropped it in here. Cool. I'm trying to decide which of these questions will be easier to answer first. I am going to go with... We'll go with the pet peeves one first, because Soph's question is kind of deep, and it might take a little minute to answer. So we'll go with pet peeves questions first. Pet peeves of mine. I might actually have to think about this for a second. So please excuse if we take just a moment of silence for me to consider this question fully. All right, back in a minute, Zivils. All right, let me see, pet peeves of mine. So as a player, I think that one of my pet peeves is when I want to try to do a thing, and I don't get the opportunity from the dungeon master to do so. This is different from people. Oh yeah, people who don't pay attention during combat. Fair enough, but I'm also sometimes one of those, so I feel like I can't use that one because sometimes I am that person. But I think that one of my biggest pet peeves as a player is when I want to do something and the DM is just like unwilling to work with me on it. Here's the thing. Sometimes I throw things out there and I know that it's like a hope and a prayer that the dungeon master will agree to do it. Mostly because it's like ridiculous and wild and I'm really just fishing to be able to do a thing, right? And that I understand. Like within reason, I get it. Like there are some things that I'm just like, okay, I understand, whatever. That's a fair position to take, and if you don't want to deal with shenanigans, I get it. But sometimes I'll offer a thing up, and I'll even offer to work with the dungeon master on it, like at the table, of course, right? So like something will happen, and I'll be like, "Can I do this thing?" And the dungeon master will say no, and I'm like, "Okay, what if I did this thing that's similar to the thing that I want to do, but we can kind of like, I'm willing to even compromise, you know, like negotiate at the table to see what I'm able to get away with, or like what story moments we're willing to go for, whatever, you know?" And occasionally I played with dungeon masters who are just like straight up no to all of that. Or they'll like let it happen, but in a really stupid way. Let me walk that back because that's not a really great descriptor of it. It's like they'll let me do a thing and then immediately counter it. You know what? They'll J.J. Abrams, Ryan Johnson me. That's what they'll do. They'll J.J. Abrams third Star Wars movie me as Ryan Johnson, director of the second Star Wars movie in the new trilogy. That's what happens. It's like they're like, all right, do a thing, and then they immediately do a thing that counters the purpose of what I was trying to do in the first place. That's probably the worst version of it. Is when they'll let you do a thing, but they're not actually letting you do the thing at all. They just like immediately counter what it is you're trying to do. Say la vie. Um, it's just that railroading kind of thing, and I understand. And it's one of those things where you have to know when the dungeon master is doing it. Like, it's also one of those things where I try to be understanding about like what's going on, because maybe the dungeon master's having a bad day, maybe they're just tired, maybe they didn't really want to play today, or maybe they're new and they're not really sure how to handle like the more open world, like, you know, open response essay question that is Dungeons and Dragons RP. You know, or maybe they're not super familiar with the mechanics, so they don't know. I think that sometimes I have like blocked people from doing a thing in a game, and it's just because I didn't realize that the mechanics let them do the thing that they wanted to do. Um, so I know that one of the things is like Hattie always wants to jump up onto the back of various things that the party is fighting. I always kind of want to let her do it, but sometimes like the things that she's jumping up on, they're like, you can't really jump up on them because they're not big enough. And there are also like certain rules to jumping up on things. And sometimes I just let her have it and sometimes I don't. And I'm not consistent about that. So I wasn't clear in like the table rules about like how and when that's allowed. And that's on me. So, you know, there's always like breakdowns of communication between the players and the dungeon master. Um, but I just like being able to try to get away with things. And it's really sad whenever the dungeon master like doesn't let me try to get away with things. So, you know, it is what it is. I like whenever I play rogues, I always try to get advantage in a number of numerous and ridiculous and silly ways. I think I have a card here that somewhere that lets me play that Pat Rotfist bullshit, which is my favorite card to pull out and use in a game, which just lets me do something ridiculous to gain advantage on a rogue attack, and I love it. Um, Hattie does push the limits on riding enemies, and I want her to be able to do it, and she did do it. She rode a stone griffin once, and then I actually read up on the rules of how, like, because I went to the Dungeon Master's Guide. This is getting a little off topic, but I went to the Dungeon Master's Guide, and there actually is a set of rules for how to hop up on an enemy that's bigger than you, but it actually takes like a turn, and you have to get yourself like balanced first. Like once you get yourself balanced, then you can like proceed to do whatever you want. But also there's like, yeah, it's a vague area, and there's a lot of like mechanical complications that come along with it. But I do try to let Hattie do it sometimes, you know. Give her the joy of being able to get up on an enemy and then punch them in the back of the head, you know. Um as for the dungeon master side, um this is gonna sound really funny, but I'm never angry with the players, but I am sometimes disappointed with the players. Uh, Mostly, um, and it's kind of one of those things where I hold a mirror up to myself whenever it seems like, you know, people are drifting or people aren't super engaged. Um, I always kind of ask myself first whether it's like is it me? Is it like the way that I'm telling the story that's like not interesting or not engaging to the players? And it could be, you know, like I'm also a person where sometimes if I'm listening to a thing, like I have my eyes closed or I'm looking off in a different direction because I'm listening, um, but I'm not necessarily looking at what's going on. That happens during Road to Elturel sometimes. Like sometimes I'll be looking off screen, like not at the players on the screen, but it's also because I'm like trying to listen for what everything the players are saying are. And so I'm just trying to like cut out as many distractions as possible by like, you know, just listening to the words and trying to parse out everything that's going on. Um I think probably what's, you know, kind of sad and disappointing to me the most is whenever I have an idea that I think is really cool, and the players don't want to engage with it. Um, that's also about knowing the group, right? So I've definitely been in a situation where I've come up with something really cool, but I also presented it to what I know in retrospect is the wrong group of people. Um, so I have a group that I play with who is very sword and sorcery, min maxing, combat and gold, and that's what they're about. So, and and some like really goofy RP storytelling stuff. There's a lot of like really weird arguments about things and stuff in that group, and it's really fun and it's really goofy. Um, but when I'm the DM in that group, I try not to get like I try to go against what I usually do when crafting a Dungeons and Dragons story, which is going super heavy on the story. And I kind of try to focus on keeping it more like ridiculous and lighthearted because I know that with that group, getting really deep into story isn't something that they are interested in. And I've made the mistake of trying that before and having it sort of like slap me in the face. Um, so yeah, I mean the biggest thing probably scheduling, honestly. That's my biggest pet peeve. Is if you try to see this is so hypocritical too because I'm also a person that like I won't respond to scheduling messages, but if you're trying to schedule a thing and like no one's responding to you and you're just like when are we going to do a thing? Um that's probably the biggest pet peeve I actually have as a dungeon master to the players is like if I'm trying to take the lead on scheduling a thing and then no one's responding to me, that's a big pet peeve. But also that makes me hypocritical because I also do that to other people and it's a real shame. And I'm sorry to anyone I've ever done that to, especially when it comes to TTRPGs. But yes, I agree with you. Yes, Seville's disappointment. I'm not angry. I'm just disappointed. Um, yeah, sometimes you second guess yourself, and yes, I agree with you, Emmy. Every group and player is different, and there's definitely a learning curve with each group. And sometimes even like in a group, you have people who are interested in the way that you tell a story, and you have people who aren't interested in how you tell a story. And sometimes like players just don't get along in certain groups. Like, and it's not necessarily that their personalities are conflicting. Um, it's just like the way that they like to play and engage with Dungeons and Dragons is different enough that it's hard to create a game where they can both really be enjoying themselves for most of the time. um, it happens. um, but that's also part of what session zeros are for, which we'll talk about eventually here. We'll talk about session zeros and kind of how to set that up and talking about like table rules and all that good stuff. But yeah, scheduling is so hard. But that's also why it's really, really important to have that communication lines open, to be able to like talk with people and, you know, kind of know that people are going to get back to you because, it's already so hard to find a time when everyone's available. You really got to be on top of like, scheduling that stuff. True, it can be harder the older you get, responsibilities get in the way. So one of the things that I do with one of my groups, a group of Cleveland theater friends that I have, we pretty much always schedule our next session at the end of our current session. So once we get done, our last order of business before we all say goodnight for the night is when is everyone's availability, when can we all get together again, because of course all of them are involved in theater, which right now isn't like as much of a scheduling conflict for obvious reasons because there's not a lot of theater going on right now. But their schedules can be all over the place because they're theater people, and so we always try to make time at the end of the session to schedule when our next session is going to be, so we never kind of leave that scheduling question hanging whenever we move forward, and it's been good for us. We haven't like played every week, but we have played most weeks, and occasionally we have to skip a week here and there whenever we're all busy. But we are able to get together, and it's cool and it's fun, and I can't wait for us to actually be able to sit in the same room in person again because I got a lot of cool stuff for them. A lot of fun prop stuff because I really like using props and I can't use them online. I mean, I can, but it's hard. But anyway. Um, Right, so that is question 1, and it is almost 7:30, so I may have to speed through the second question. Oh, Whiskey. Oh, you asked a question. When was the last time a player character died in one of your games? It was a couple Sundays ago. One of my friends in the college group died horribly. Uh, he died horribly to a... What did he die to? It was something crazy. His new character almost died immediately to a druid and a dragon. But his old character died to a stone giant. It was a stone giant. He just led the party into a crazy situation, then died to a stone giant. It was very funny and very ridiculous. Um, Wait, was that where he died? Where the fuck did that character die? Did he die to the werebats? He died to something. It's a character that dies a lot. I feel bad because that player is like the quintessential my character dies person. I do feel bad for him sometimes. Uh, I do remember he had 2 characters who died in quick succession to disintegration blast from Beholder Eye Ray. Like one of them died to it, and then he made a new character, and they went back and faced that Beholder again, and then that same Beholder hit the new character with a randomly rolled second disintegration ray, which disintegrated that character immediately. It was so bad. I felt so bad. Dude went through 3 characters in 3 weeks, and I felt bad. But it was also very funny. So that answers that question. Um, it's not a good way to go. You can't come back from disintegration. Like, disintegration is just, like, you don't get death saves. It's just out. You just out. Okay, so Soph asked a question on the podcast yesterday. Yes, I remember hearing this. And it is not the English language who is she, which I also heard on the podcast. Soph asks, how do you deal with multiple players who have similar character personalities? How do you make a diverse background for each individual character? So you guys kind of answered this question on the podcast yesterday, or at least Naomi did, to some extent, which is, characters make different choices. It was a real that's rough buddy situation. But even if characters start with the same personality, they tend to make different choices as time goes on. So in the example that Becca was using on the podcast yesterday, for the one shot, there were 2 characters. One was a skinny beanpole Goliath, and the other was a skinny beanpole Furbolg who played the kazoo. And the thing about those 2 was, yes, they were both kind of like awkward and shy and whatever. And they were doing security detail, which was hilarious. And yeah, their characters were kind of similar, but if those were characters in like a long-standing game, we would flesh out their backgrounds. And in fleshing out their backgrounds, we would sort of figure out where the differences actually lie. The thing is, for me personally, I find that whenever I play a new character or a new NPC, they tend to be very similar whenever like I start playing them. They all kind of end up being like some like slightly off from center variation of myself. Or at least the same kind of character. But then as I really start to think about their backgrounds and how their backgrounds have affected them over time and the choices that they make in the game, I really start solidifying those core personality traits, and then they sort of differentiate themselves over time. In Road to Elturel, I worked really hard with you guys, or I like to think that I worked hard with you guys to, flesh out backgrounds. And we still do it sometimes as we go. We sort of create new background things for your characters. But I like to think that we worked really hard to give you guys a foundation for who your characters are in this world and give them space and room to sort of, take that information and translate it into how you play your character on the screen. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba-bum. Yes, Emmy is also true. True? Correct. Uh, Having a session zero is a great way to introduce the characters. To be honest, in some ways, the session zero for Road to Elturel was Danger and Daggerford. It was like a little 3 session arc that all the characters kind of met each other. Um, you kind of had like some predefined relationships. Some of those still stick in the game. Not all of them do. Kaya and Seymour's is kind of there. Um, I wouldn't say that like Hattie and Raina are super close, even though they were kind of connected to each other in Danger and Daggerford. Um, but it just kind of gives you that in session zeros of just sort of like kind of trying to establish some things about your character and their personality, and just kind of like letting the reins go from there. I don't know if that's actually helpful or it's really useful in answering that question. Um, but I think that the important thing, at least for me, is I really try to work with the players to develop what those backgrounds are. I ask questions. I ask questions about what would they do in this situation, or what do you think of having them have been involved with this thing? Um, I think of the story that I have frameworked in my head, and I think what are interesting characters that can slot into those things. Probably one of the biggest defining things for characters for me as the dungeon master behind the screen is kind of understanding what some of those central conflicts of the characters are. So I've mentioned this before. I'll probably mention again, but in Road to Elturel, you have Seymour, whose central conflict is duty. He has these duties to everybody. He has duty to his patron. He has duty to his organization. He has duty to his family. He has duty to his friends. And what happens when those start conflicting with each other? What does he choose? Where does he go? Um, with uh, with Kaya, it's a question of what will she do whenever the consequences of her actions catch up with her. Because that's how she lives her life, is a life without consequence. And so whenever those consequences start coming back around, start catching up with her, how is she going to deal with them? Because that's something that she doesn't want to deal with. And so what happens when she has to, when she has no choice? With Reina, her conflict is this, this conflict centralizing on, not necessarily good versus evil, but, being pulled in these different directions. And how is it that Reina gets what she wants? um, without sort of losing herself in the larger picture of these two like deities that want her on their side. Um, for Hattie, it's a question of actually not an unsimilar conflict to Reina's, which is she's part of this huge organization, and even though that organization Candlekeep is not a monolith, um, there are a lot of moving cogs within Candlekeep. It's sort of like, what is she willing to do for Candlekeep versus what is she willing to do as a person on behalf of her friends? Like, how willing is she to go against, what Candlekeep is directing her to do? And the thing is, up to this point, I've pretty much left Candlekeep out of the story, but as soon as Kaya gets sending, they're going to have a much bigger part to play because there's going to be conversations happening between Candlekeep and them, or at the very least between Silveris Savikas and them. And I think that as the story continues, Candlekeep is going to start playing a bigger role, and it's going to be a lot more complicated because you're going to start getting opinions of a lot of different people in Candlekeep, and everybody's going to have their own opinion on what's going on, and it's going to be really interesting to see how Hattie deals with all of that stuff and how she prioritizes that. And then with Snipe, the conflict is, Snipe wants to go home. Now, of course, there's the conflict of, well, half of him is missing now. So how are they going to deal with that? But also it's the idea of like, what are they willing to give up in order to go home? That's a big question that I ask myself a lot with Snipe, which is, how much are they willing to give up in order to go home? And I have some ideas moving forward that I would like to play with just to see what Snipe would do. Just sort of like testing the waters to see what Snipe's willing to do to get the chance to go home, which is what they want. So hopefully that kind of answers your question, Soph. I know that was a little all over the place, but I think we got there in the end, maybe. So, if there are no more questions... Oh god, what did I just drop? Oh, Excalibur. I'm sorry, Excalibur. I dropped a sword. If there are no more questions, then we will proceed to the proceedings. Yes, it is my favorite thing to do. The Road to El Toro players can attest that I ask them deep probing questions about their characters all the time. I have lists of questions, and then I type out their answers, and then I come up with more questions based on what's going on, and also their answers to those questions. It's a never-ending cycle of tell me more about what's going on with your character, which is also one of the reasons that I love listening to the I Think Therefore I Roll podcast, because they talk about that stuff a lot. Thank you, Zavilles. I think that it went pretty well, too. It is a deep cutting vein of a question, and it's a really fun one to ask, because it really makes the players think about their characters as actual people, which can add like a very fun element to the game. So I am gonna be real with you guys. I did not prepare a song today. But luckily I have any number of songs that I can pull out in my repertoire of mandolin music. So, yeah, send me more of Raina's story. Send me all of Raina's story. There's so much good stuff there. And I use it all. I use it all against her. What do I have available? Do I want to repeat an old song? I could. That's an option. You know what? We'll go with a classic, because I really love this song. And I think it's really good. And it's a great song to leave off on. It'll be my go-to in the future if ever I forget to prepare music again. So, let's see if I remember. There we go. Parting Glass. Of all the money that e'er I spent it in good company. And of all the harm that e'er I done, alas, 'twas done to none but me. And oh, and of all the harm that e'er I done, that memory now I can't recall. So fill to me the parting glass. Good night and joy be with you all. We're gonna see if I can save it on the second verse, huh? Of all the comrades that e'er I had, that are saddened by my going way, and of all the sweethearts that e'er I had, that would wish me one more day to stay. But since it falls unto my lot that I should rise and you should not, I'll gently rise and softly call, good night and joy be with you all. Good night. Enjoy be with you all indeed. I will see you all next week, where we will be talking about the many wonderful planes of existence here on Smokescreen. Please feel free to catch Road to Elturel on Saturdays. It's a really fun game. And until next time, have a good night. And I will see you all next time.